What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American, here today to react and learn about Bokmål versus Nynorsk. Now, I know that these both have to do with Norwegian language, but that's about it. So today, I want to learn about what Bokmål and Nynorsk are used for and what the differences are between them. So, with that being said, let's take a look.
Now, in order to understand why we have Bokmål and Nynorsk in Norway, you need to know that Norway was actually part of Denmark for many centuries, up to 1814.
Right, okay. So understanding Bokmål and Nynorsk is going to require some knowledge of Norwegian history, which sounds very interesting. Norway was part of Denmark for a long time. Okay.
And during that time, the few people that could read or write wrote actually in Danish. Because Danish and Norwegian, they are pretty similar. So if you speak Norwegian very well, you will be able to understand Danish.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize how related Norwegian language and Danish language actually are. Like, you can actually speak in Danish and Norwegian and probably understand each other, right? So that's really interesting.
Also, the pronunciation is quite different, but once you get used to that, you can communicate with people from Denmark, even with Norwegian.
Wow.
So at the time, people would speak, would write in Danish, and when Norway became independent nation in 1814, the big question was, what national language are we going to use?
Okay, I'm starting to understand a little bit here. Because of the history of Norway being part of Denmark, when Norway finally became independent, I'm guessing a lot of Norwegian language may have been influenced by this time period of Norway and Denmark being one unified country.
So there were two groups of people. Some people said, okay, we've been writing Danish for centuries. Why not just continue doing that? We will fix a few writing issues that are unnatural for the Norwegian pronunciation, and we will add a few words that are typical of the Norwegian language and that are not common in the Danish language. But apart from that, we're just going to continue.
Oh, wow. So Norway had to make some decisions. When Norway finally became independent, Norwegians basically had to decide, are we going to keep writing using the Danish language like we've had to for a very long time, or are we going to come up with a brand new system of writing just for Norwegians? That's very interesting. I'm guessing that, I don't know, I'm guessing Norwegians probably would have wanted to have a Norwegian written language, specially created, but it would be easier and more convenient to just use the Danish written language that you already were familiar with, I guess, right? So which way did it go?
And then there were other people, you know, in the 19th century, national romanticism, they said, no, we're an independent nation now. Okay, we still have this union with Sweden, but somehow we're independent. We want our own language.
Right.
There was a linguist, his name was Ivar Aasen. He traveled to the western Norwegian fjords, to small villages, and he listened to people, he listened to their dialects, and out of these dialects, he constructed his own Norwegian language. So in 1848, he published a grammar book, the Norske Folkespråksgrammatikk.
What? So this one Norwegian person decided to just travel around Norway, listen to some of the dialects, and then this Norwegian guy just created a language grammar book, basically. He decided to take the initiative and do it.
And 2 years later, the Norske Folkespråksordbok, so the dictionary of the Norwegian people's language. And some people liked this idea and said, okay, let's go somehow back in history. Let's start using a language that is based on our dialects.
Okay.
And then in 1885, the Norwegian parliament that made the big mistake, it accepted that both these language variations, meaning the Norwegian developed by Ivar Aasen and the somehow Norwegianized Danish, became official languages.
Oh. Is that what Bokmål and Nynorsk are? One is Danish that kind of became a bit more Norwegian, but is influenced by Danish language. And one is this purely Norwegian creation of a written language created by this Norwegian guy in a book. Is that what Bokmål and Nynorsk are? The two written languages. Okay.
From that moment on, citizens in Norway can use either of the two when they're communicating with authorities.
Wow. You can use either. Both? There are two. There's two written languages in Norway. That seems very, very confusing. So which one do you learn in school in Norway? Which way do you learn to write? I'm not sure I quite understand.
This is still the situation today. So when you want to do your tax return, you can choose which variation you want to have. When you do an exam at university, you have to register, you have to write your candidate number and the subject and the study field and whatever, and whether you want to do the exam in Bokmål and Nynorsk.
Wow. Wow. I had no idea. This is like a huge divide in Norway. Or do most Norwegians tend to favor Bokmål or Nynorsk? Is one of these more popular? Is one of these more preferred by Norwegians? Or is it split 50-50? But basically, in all aspects of Norwegian life, you can choose which written language you want to have. Do Norwegians know both of these? Or do most Norwegians only know, like, one of these? Having to learn two forms of written language, that seems nearly impossible. That'd be very hard.
Okay, at the time these names still did not exist. At the time this was called riksmål and landsmål. So riksmål was actually the empirical language. Why this name? Well, good question. That's the old Danish somehow, and landsmål was the new language developed by Ivar Aasen.
Okay.
And in 1929 the names changed, and at that time it was called, or since then, it has been called Bokmål. So Bokmål comes from Danish, and Nynorsk comes from the dialects.
So Ivar, what's this guy's name? Ivar Olsen? The Norwegian man who made this book basically created Nynorsk, and Bokmål is the original Danish-Norwegian mixture that kind of existed when Norway first became independent from Denmark. Okay. I think I finally understand the origins of why these two written Norwegian languages exist in the first place. There's two of them, and that's why they exist. But is one of these, like, used more? That's what I'm wondering.
Bokmål means actually book language, and Nynorsk, new Norwegian. It's not really new because, of course, these dialects, they were very, very old, but they had never been used as a written language. In order to make everything even more complicated, once we had this situation with the two different written languages, many Norwegians thought, or some Norwegians thought, okay, they are not so far from each other. They're basically like two dialects. Why not merge them?
Oh.
So then the Norwegian government started to do orthography reforms. So every 10, 20 years, you would have a change in the official writing of both Bokmål and Nynorsk with the goal of making them more similar to each other. And this was something that the majority of the population protested against a lot.
Oh my God, this is getting very, very complicated. I guess Norwegians are familiar with this whole history. I've never heard of this before. So the Norwegian government tried to step in and clean this up a little bit, or make it more simple, or I don't know what. They thought that they were going to combine Bokmål and Nynorsk into one written language. So they've been trying to slowly combine Bokmål and Nynorsk every 20 or so years by updating the rules of the written language. That seems like, oh my God, so you have to try to learn the new written languages like every 20 years or so? Or, oh my God.
Why? Because these changes were not just tiny differences like between American and British English, where you think whether color has a U or no.
Yeah.
These were big changes. So, for example, in Bokmål, a third gender was introduced because Danish has only 2 genders, but most Norwegian dialects have 3. So in Bokmål, suddenly hundreds of words got a different grammatical gender. The spelling was sometimes changed completely.
Norwegian language has 3 genders? Really? Really? Like male, female, and what exactly? Like neutral or something? I don't know. I've never heard about that part of Norwegian language. That's really interesting.
The Ministry of Education started to rewrite textbooks for school, and they even altered century-old texts, national literature. They just changed the spelling. The rhyme was lost, the rhythm was lost. Didn't matter as long as the spelling was up to date.
So a lot of Norwegians are kind of annoyed that the Norwegian government is changing, like, really, like, written language that has been around for hundreds of years, and still trying to change it and create one single written language. I guess I understand, like, that would make things a little more easy if there was just one written language in Norway. But at the same time, the history is the history. It's kind of cool to me to learn that there's 2 ways of writing Norwegian language. That's fascinating.
So, of course, people hated that. People would go to the streets, they would tear apart textbooks. They called this the language war, språkstriden.
Wow!
Which was especially fierce in the 1950s and 1960s.
Really?
One culmination was on the 20th of February 1962, when a newsreader in the Norwegian television lost his job because he refused to read the weather report with the new expression for snow, which was since then snö, but he wanted to use the old version sne, and he insisted on it, and then he got fired.
So they were basically changing Norwegian language like every couple of years? And yeah, I would absolutely I could see where people would be annoyed at that. Like, changing your language, that's a really big deal. Like, you do not do that lightly.
So a very ridiculous situation because, of course, the dialects in Norway are not so far from each other, so people would understand each other. But still, there was this huge war.
Wow.
Until in 1981, this policy of merging the 2 Norwegian languages was finally and officially abandoned. So since then...
Oh, they actually gave up on this. I was wondering, like, are they still doing this to this day? Like, these language wars still going on? So they actually finally abandoned that.
Bokmål and Nynorsk are, just like before, the 2 official languages of the country, and you can choose whichever you want to use. Of course, due to these many orthography reforms that had been in the century before, there are many different forms within Bokmål and within Nynorsk that are also somehow acceptable.
Oh my gosh, this is getting really complicated. I don't even really understand how there can be 2 written languages. Isn't there only one Norwegian language? Like when you speak Norwegian, Isn't there one way to do it? Well, I guess there's lots of different dialects. Is Nynorsk and Bokmål like their own dialects, basically? Ways of... Couldn't you just speak Norwegian and just write down the words, like using letters? Like, why do you need different written forms? This is very hard for my American brain to understand, because we don't have different dialects. We don't have different written forms of English. It's all one. So this is really interesting to me, just tough for me to understand.
So that creates some chaos. A simple sentence, the woman raised her hand, can be written in 24 different ways in Bokmål alone. Okay, because you can say kvinnen or kvinna, and then you can say heva or hevde or hevet, and you can say honna or honnen, honna, honnen. So
what? Do Norwegians memorize all of this? Do you know all of these different forms of words? Or maybe are they similar enough that you can kind of figure it out? Or do you actually have to memorize all this? That's amazing.
If you multiply these versions, you have 24 possibilities of writing a very simple sentence. They're all Bokmål and they're all correct.
Oh my God.
I don't want to go too much into the details now. What are the differences between Bokmål and Nynorsk? Maybe one time we can make a separate video about that. Anyway, people then ask me, okay, who speaks Bokmål and who speaks Nynorsk?
Yes, perfect. This is exactly what I was wondering about.
And that is a misconception. Just the question is a misconception because nobody speaks it. The thing is that these two languages, Bokmål and Nynorsk, they are written languages. Norwegians speak their dialects, and the dialects are regional, and they can be a little bit more closer or further from either Bokmål or Nynorsk.
Okay. He's exactly right. I had no idea that didn't even make sense as a question. Who speaks Bokmål? Who speaks Nynorsk? So that doesn't even make sense, because it's only written. But couldn't you just read the words out loud and then it would be spoken? I don't understand. So, but you do have lots of different dialects, but I don't know.
So in the cities, the pronunciation or the way people speak is usually closer to Bokmål, and in the countryside, especially in the west, it's usually more closer to Nynorsk. But that's
okay. That at least clears up a little bit for me. In cities, in populated areas in general, people speak in dialects that are similar to Bokmål. Bokmål was the Danish-Norwegian mixture, and in the countryside of Norway, generally speaking, people speak a little bit closer to Nynorsk. Is that sort of correct?
That's just a rough idea.
Okay.
So which one to learn? For you as a student, is it a difficult choice? Not at all. It's very simple, although some Norwegians will hate me for what I'm going to say now. The thing is, 90% of Norwegians nowadays use Bokmål.
Okay.
Okay, so the former Danish.
Okay. There we go. That's another big question that I had. What is the more popular one? I feel like over time, something is going to become more popular, and it's Bokmål, actually, which is interesting. I wouldn't have necessarily assumed that. I might have assumed Norwegians would gravitate towards the Norwegian, the Norwegian style written language, Nynorsk. It was made from different Norwegian dialects. But that's not the case. Norwegians have gravitated more towards Bokmål, which is actually the Norwegian-Danish combination. That's interesting.
Somehow Norwegianized language.
Yeah.
Therefore, it makes sense, absolutely, to learn Bokmål, unless you know for sure that you will live in a tiny village somewhere in the west where everybody uses Nynorsk. But apart from that, I would just definitely go for Bokmål.
Interesting. So if you only know Bokmål, can you understand some of Nynorsk? Are they similar enough that you can understand both, maybe?
Understanding Nynorsk is not so difficult. Though I do recommend, if you're an advanced student, like beyond the A2 level, I would say it does not hurt to learn a little bit of Nynorsk.
Okay.
In our books and in our online video courses, there's a small chapter about Nynorsk. The reason we put it there is, well, there's two reasons actually. One reason is you are going to encounter Nynorsk from time to time, because all government agencies and also the official Norwegian media, they have to publish some part of their content in Nynorsk.
I was wondering, I was just about to say, when you're reading a Norwegian newspaper or a Norwegian article, is it usually written in Bokmål, but sometimes a little bit in Nynorsk, just to be fair, I guess?
So sometimes you will just have a news article, information from your university, something like that. It will just be written in Nynorsk. Don't be afraid, the differences are not that big.
Okay.
So it makes sense to learn like the most important differences in writing.
I see.
And maybe the most common words that differ from both of them. But of course, the overlap is huge. So sometimes it takes a little bit of reading until you realize it's actually not Bokmål, it's Nynorsk.
That's very helpful, actually. That's exactly what I was wondering about. Bokmål and Nynorsk, there are some big differences, but there's a lot of similarities as well.
The second reason for that, why it makes sense to learn a little bit of Nynorsk, is that many dialects are closer to Nynorsk. So it will help you understand Norwegians who speak a dialect that is, yeah, as I said, a bit closer to Nynorsk.
Oh my gosh. So to understand everyone in Norway, you have to know like different dialects, different written languages, different versions of Norwegian. Do most Norwegians like learn the different kinds of Norwegian language, or how does that work? It seems like a lot to learn.
Yeah, so that was a little bit of an overview on the differences between Bokmål and Nynorsk.
Yeah, okay. Very, very good. I think that's the end right there. That was really interesting and actually quite a bit complicated, actually. This was by the Norwegian School, and I got to give it a like, because I did like that. I did learn a lot about Bokmål and Nynorsk. I learned about the history here, and some of the differences, and which is more popular, and some of the similarities, and it's really interesting. We don't have anything like this in American English. Like, I'm sure a lot of Norwegians know that, because most Norwegians speak English very well. So, you know, I don't know. Norwegian language seems a bit intimidating to me after hearing this, but it was really fun to learn about this specific topic. I did enjoy this. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on Bokmål and Nynorsk. That'd be very interesting to hear about. And if you could clear up any of the things I didn't understand. Some of this was quite confusing to me. That'd be fantastic as well. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Norway and Norwegian culture and learning things about Norway, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.